Hey guys, Justin Bryant here from selfmadesuccess.com. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make money playing fantasy sports, whether you just want to do it for fun, as a hobby, you want to even get a side income or a full-time income. Some people have actually quit their jobs and done this full-time. And I'm going to show you, whatever situation you're in, how to make lots of money doing this. I'm going to show you the process you need to go through and the process that the top earners go through that make six figures or more doing this. So the first step you need to take towards making money with fantasy sports is you need to pick a daily fantasy sports company to start focusing on. So you have two main ones in this area that I would recommend, which are FanDuel and DraftKings. Okay, they're the ones you probably seen advertised the most. They're the two biggest companies. They may even have a merger to where they become one company. They haven't done it yet, but in the future they might. But I would pick one of these companies. The real main difference between them, if you're trying to pick, is DraftKings will actually have more sports available. So if you want to get into, say, NASCAR or MMA or something like that, or even golf, and do fantasy that way, then you want to go with DraftKings. Now, obviously, you need to look at the rules. If you're just going to do the main sports like football, baseball, basketball, hockey, or soccer, you want to look at the rules. So you can go to fanduel.com/rules. You can go to the rules page, DraftKings.com/help/whatever sport you're going to look at. As a side note, I'm going to have all these links, all these resources and things that I mentioned in this video that will help you, as well as show notes and related content. All of this will be on one page on selfmadesuccess.com. So you don't need to worry about memorizing all this stuff right now. You could find that link in the video description after the video and go straight to all these pages. But you want to look at the rules for each one. Obviously, they're going to score slightly different, so they're not exactly the same. And they're going to have a little bit of a variance in the positions they have. So you might get a flex option in DraftKings, whereas it might just be a certain number of positions for fantasy football in FanDuel. So just look at the different things, look at the rules pages. Like I said, you'll find those rules page links in the show notes that I'm going to have for you. But you just want to look at the scoring, you want to look at the sports available, the events available, and things like that. They both pay out lots of money, so that's really how you need to pick between them. But once you've done that, once you picked the right company for you, at least to start out with, you can always get into other companies later on as well. You also want to determine which sport you're going to focus on first, okay? So when you're starting out, you need to just focus on one sport. Once you get it down, you can apply the principles that worked for you to the other ones, and then just change the statistics and change the numbers and things like that. So step 2, determine which sport you're going to really focus on and start out with. Preferably, you want to do the sports that will have the most events. Football and basketball tend to be two of the most popular on both companies' websites, but also you can try, you have football, you have baseball. It's another one. A lot of people love baseball. There's hockey, soccer. With DraftKings, obviously, you have baseball, football, hockey, basketball, golf, soccer, Canadian Football League, MMA, NASCAR. So you can kind of figure out which ones you want to focus on. Preferably, you want to go with one of the main sports, like basketball or football or baseball, because they're going to have the most events, they're going to have the most players, and you're going to be able to get paid the most. Now, the other thing about this is you might want to focus on, say, basketball or baseball, for instance, because of the amount of games that are going to be played in a typical season. So that's another thing to look at. If you want to do American football, you're going to have a 16-game season. So your regular season's only 16 games long, you only have 16 real good opportunities to make a lot of money. Now, obviously, you can play in multiple events in one day for each week, but the thing is, also, more people know about football than any else. So if you read any article on an interview with a professional daily fantasy sports player, he will tell you that, you know, whether they do football or not for fantasy, football is harder because there are more people who know their stuff about fantasy football than any of the others. Fantasy football is really how this all got started, and then it really branched into the other sports after. But that's going to be the hardest because of the fewer games and the amount of knowledge your opposition's going to have. Now, if you stick with, say, basketball, baseball, or hockey, you're going to have longer seasons. A basketball season has 82 games. Baseball has over 100 games. And that will give you more chances to make money. So you can, say, lose a little bit of money in basketball one day, but the next day you're going to have another event because there are basketball games played every day with just a few exceptions. So keep that in mind. Pick one sport to focus on. You might want to pick football just because you know the most about it and that's the one you want to play. That's fine. I'm just giving you a heads up that you're going to have more competition and less chances to make money with football as opposed to one of these others with long seasons and less skilled players. So number 3, you want to make sure you have a Microsoft Office or Google Drive account. So Microsoft Office, of course, allows you to use Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, and these great office tools that are really helpful for students, for home, for business. And Google now has their own version of it called Google Drive, which has Google Sheets, Google Docs, Google Slides, which is very much the equivalent to Microsoft Office, except it's Google's version. And it's actually a little bit simpler to use, in my opinion. But Google Drive is free to use. All you have to do is get a Gmail account, which is free, and then you get about 15 gigabytes of storage and unlimited use of Google Slides, which is their PowerPoint, Google Docs, which is their equivalent of Microsoft Word, and Google Sheets, which is their equivalent of Excel. So I prefer Google Drive, but the thing is, Microsoft Office will give you more options. You just have to pay for it. It looks like they do offer a way to start online for free now, probably to compete with Google Drive because Google Drive gets so many users because of its free versions. But you still have to have a Microsoft account and everything. So you can start online for free now with Microsoft Office. Excel, that's the one you're going to need is Excel. You're going to be needing to do spreadsheets for this to work for you to be successful on daily fantasy sports consistently. So just keep that in mind. Pick between Google Drive or Microsoft Office. You need Excel or Google Sheets. And that will allow you to make spreadsheets, do code, and things like that to help you pick the best players. All right? So pick between those. Try out Excel for free. Try out Google Sheets and see which one you like the best. Now that you've done that, go to number 4 where you get a template or set up a spreadsheet that can optimize your lineups. Now you need to keep a few things in mind. When you create a lineup optimizer, this is going to tell you the lineup you need to pick. It's going to be the best possible lineup given the data. All right, so you have to crunch a lot of data to be good at fantasy sports. And you're going to need to know things like the salary. So if you go to let's say you go to FanDuel or something, you look at the salary. Say players have fantasy points per game that they score, then they have a salary. So you don't want to just pay the maximum salary because then you're going to put yourself in a bind and have to pick a lot of low-end players to fill out your lineup. you have to find the balance between matchup, fantasy points per game, how much they're going to cost, and things like that, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But you have to work on creating a lineup optimizer in your spreadsheet, or you can use one that is on someone else's website. So I'm going to give you a few options here. You can go, if you're going to use Google Docs, you can go and download a template. Now you could probably use this with Excel as well because they're similar. But as far as using a spreadsheet, it can go between either platform usually. So you want to get the Daily Fantasy Sports FanDuel NBA optimization model. If you go to Google Templates, you will be able to find that. Just search for Fantasy Sports and it will come up in the spreadsheet section. This one right here, it's by Sean Devine. And you can actually just change the positions, change the salaries, and things like that to make it work with football, make it work with hockey, and all the other sports. But the thing is, it works. It works with Google Sheets. It was a little bit harder for me to make one work with Google Sheets than it was for Excel, but Google Sheets is a little bit simpler as far as the interface. I just prefer it. But as far as getting a template on Google Sheets without you having to start from scratch, this is the one you want to get. So right there, I'm going to have a link to it, of course. You just download the template. It's got great ratings, and I've already tried it, and it does work. Then you would use it for whichever sport you're going to use it for. So it kind of looks like this. I'm sorry it's a little cut off, but you get the idea that what it does is every time it picks a player in your best possible lineup, it puts a 1 next to it. Everything else has a 0, so you can see who's selected and who's not, and it tells you in a list of the players with their position, name, forecasted points, which is their projection, how much they're going to cost, their salary. Then it goes by positions. You can change this. So you would change this to say quarterback, running back, wide receiver if you're doing football, and things like that. Settings, you can change the settings here very easily on another page in this template. And then it gives you the optimized roster, the number one roster that you can use right here. And it adds up to, it needs to be less than 60,000 for this model. So it adds up to 59,800, and it gets you the highest possible forecasted points while staying under the cap and meeting all the position requirements. So you can use that, completely free to get that template. If you want to do, if you want to create your own, then that's another thing you can do. I'm going to show you another better way actually, which allows you to use the lineup optimizer through Roto Grinders, which is a website for fantasy sports. But what you can do is you can use the software on their site to just create the best possible lineup based on your projections. So they have all the salaries and all that stuff done for you, the list of players. You can change some settings here, but this is one of the very few fantasy sports websites you don't have to make a paid account or membership with to use. So what you can do is import. You can change the minutes. You can change your point, the fantasy point projections, and it allows you to see what your optimal lineup is without having to build your own lineup optimizer in a spreadsheet. So you can go to rotogrinders.com to use that. It's called the Lineup Builder. Of course, I'm going to have links to all this stuff, or you can build your own. So it kind of depends on what you want to do, but building your own takes time, and it can be kind of discouraging because it's a long process if you've never done this kind of stuff before. I've done it before. There are tutorials on YouTube and on Google that you can find to do this, but you could just use the RotoGrinders lineup optimizer or use this template for Google Docs. So that would be much easier. So once you have something that works, just look at it and see if it, just click optimize, and if it works, then that's all you really need. As far as for step 4, you just need something that works. Then we'll get more into how to pick the right players and things like that. So number 5, you need to figure out which factors will determine a player's performance. You have the lineup optimizer, which will pick based on what the projections of that player is. It will allow you to focus on that main fantasy sports website we figured out. It will allow you to do that sport that you want to focus on. But you need to know exactly what affects a player's performance. So there are a lot of things that go into this. I did an example for you that is related to football. So if you look at this, I just did a fantasy football performance factors sheet, and I listed all of the different things that affect a football player's performance for fantasy. So these are some of the things that you would look at. What players are playing around them. You would look at injuries. Do they have an injury? If they have a hamstring injury, a receiver probably won't do as well as if he was fully healthy. What's the opposing defense? What's the opposing offense? How good are they? How good are they versus a specific position? So if you're trying to figure out who would be the best running back, what is the opposing defense versus running backs usually? What is the opposing defense's rushing defense? How good is the total team? A lot of people forget to do this, but factoring in how good the entire team is a big part of it, because that will determine usually how many points are scored, how many points are allowed, and you average those. The opposing total team, Vegas lines will really help you. Vegas lines are basically when they determine what they think the final score will be and what the spread between the teams will be. Say, if the Vegas lines for football are the Patriots will win by 3 points versus the Redskins, then there you go. You can work backwards from that in a way through your statistics, or you can just use that and just factor it into your overall algorithm. You can also factor in things like weather, whether they're home or away, how much they traveled before the game, who their coach is and the tendencies of their coaching staff, what plays are they expected to play, like how many plays are they going to play, are they having a short week, are they going to have enough preparation. Sometimes a team will have to play back-to-backs in basketball. Sometimes they'll have to play on very little practice in football. Say they play Sunday and then they have to play Thursday. What is their fantasy points per game? That we'll show you how to find that here in a minute. Time of possession. There's all kinds of things you have to look at when it comes to football, basketball, anything. So you need to make a list here. You can use this one for football. As you can see, it covers pretty much everything. But you need to know exactly what affects a player's performance, everything that affects a player's performance that at least can be measured. Now, you're not going to be able to measure whether they have, drama at home and that affects them, or whether they had a problem with their family and that affects their performance. You can't measure that. That's not something you need to worry about. But you can measure how consistent they are by seeing how often they hit their average. You can see their floor, their ceiling, how bad do they play on their bad games, how good do they play on their good games. You can measure a lot of this stuff just with a few basic statistic websites. So list those things for whatever sports you're going to do, and then you're going to have to work on getting the numbers, which we'll talk about here in a second. Number 6, step 6, of course, create a spreadsheet algorithm that turns those factors into a projection score. So you have projections. So the way this looks, obviously I showed you this earlier. You have, when you look at the players, you have their position, you have the player's name, you have their forecasted points, which is what we're working with right now. In this step, you have their salary, and then whether or not they're selected for the top lineup. The top lineup, of course, once you get this down, will usually make you some money more times than not. And to get the right projections is probably the hardest part. You can set up these lineup optimizers, you can figure out their salary, you can do all the other stuff. The hardest part is getting accuracy from your projections. Now you can use the projections of other fantasy sports websites like Fantasy Pros or Roto Grinders or some of these other sites that you can pay to just use their stuff for and not have to do any of this. But most of the time you're going to lose. They might be pretty good, but think about it. If a few thousand people pay Fantasy Pros or one of these fantasy sports websites $20 a month, $50 a month, $100 a month, whatever it is, and they use the lineups that those sites give them, how many people are going to have the same exact lineup in these events? So when you go to FanDuel and you click on an event, how many people are going to have the exact same lineup that was optimized by another company? The other company doesn't care because they're making a bunch of money from subscription fees. But you might tie with 500 other people that also have the same subscription as you. So the goal is to have a better projection algorithm than these other sites. You need to have more detail. That's really the name of the game. How detailed is it, and where are you getting your numbers from? So if you want to beat them, you have to go by as many factors as possible and put them in your spreadsheets. To get a good projection score, get your numbers from good statistics sites. As a side note, if you want to automatically put in the statistics and automate it after you find the right sources, you can follow this page here. I'll have a link to it in the description, but it's called How to Download Sports Data. And you can automatically import sports data from ESPN and Yahoo Sports and things like that to make this process much faster. Eventually you can basically automate your fantasy sports, but that would be how you do it. He kind of goes over a quick summary of how to do it there. But when you're picking a lineup, you have to download the players list here. Of course, that will tell you fantasy points per game, just basic stuff. Fantasy points per game, how many games they've played, just the stuff you see here. What position they play, what their name is, and their salary. But you can't just go off their average fantasy points. So you also want to use sites like the Vegas odds. If you want to go to vegasinsider.com, it'll tell you what the spread is expected for the games. If you want to go to stats.nba.com, you can get sortable team stats. This is great for basketball. Some of the most in-depth stats are on here. You can see all kinds of shooting percentages. You can see plus, minus. There's pretty much anything that can be measured is on here. And also, while I'm on the subject, you have to look at the rules to figure out exactly how it's going to be scored. So if you're on FanDuel, you can't just assign a number value to different fantasy performances. So you can't just guess how much a rush yard is worth. You have to use the one for the website you're on. So go to fanduel.com/rules or go to DraftKings.com/help to find how the scoring system works for both companies. That will tell you how to score each one. So then you put this in your spreadsheet, and that will allow you to figure out, okay, so if my player scores 2 rushing touchdowns per game, That's 8 points per game, okay, on FanDuel. Or no, that's 12. But it's 12 points per game on FanDuel if you score 2 rushing touchdowns a game. So you put things like that together, okay? You take their stats from pages like NBA and then Yahoo Sports, and you take the stats that you need that are measured by these companies, and then you combine them on a game-to-game basis with what these points are worth. Then you have additional factors. Now that you have, say, points per game, assists per game, rushing yards per game, and all this stuff, you can factor in also how the opposing team does against certain people, which you can go to, say, rotoguru.com for. It's actually rotoguru1.com. But that will allow you to figure out fantasy sports points by the defense on average, by the offense, by certain players. Yahoo Sports is really good, I've found, for football. NBA.com is great for basketball. They have advanced filters. They have all kinds of sortable stats that most companies don't cover. Or you can go and use the stats from actual daily fantasy sports websites like RotoGrinders, where they measure other things as well. Some of them will even have the Vegas lines and their ceiling, their floor in the actual projection. Now, you won't be able to use their tools and stuff because you have to get a membership, but you can copy their numbers, just right click and copy their numbers and then put it into your own spreadsheet. So just use some of their numbers that they've already gathered and then combine that with the official team sites to get all the numbers you need in your spreadsheet for the best projections. Okay, so that's how you do it. You combine the rules, you figure out, okay, how does FanDuel figure out how many points they get? How does DraftKings figure it out? Combine the official stats with the fantasy stats that you also need to get and go by all the possible factors, the most detailed list of factors possible to get the most accurate numbers. So once you figured out your projection score, number 7, you need to pick an event on a daily fantasy sports site and download the player spreadsheet. So let's go back to FanDuel. You need to click this button right here. Now, obviously, they're going to have a similar one on DraftKings. But all you do, you download the players list, and then you import it into an Excel sheet, like with Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, whichever one you want to use. All you do is you download the file, you go to one of those, click File, Open, and then click the file, and it'll open it for you. Then you just need to copy the salary and match it up with the name and the projections. So then you'll be back at what this looks like. So see, it'll have the salary, the points that you project, the player name, and the position all right next to each other, all lined up for each player. And then that's when your optimizer picks the top lineup possible, and you get something like this. Okay? So download that and match up the salary with the projected points for each player. Number 8, you need to apply salary, position, name, and the projection of players to the lineup optimizer and get your lineup. So like I just said, you have salary, position, their name, and the projection of each player lined up in your lineup optimizer, whether you use the one on RotoGrinders or you use the template I showed you for Google Sheets. And then you click Optimize, and there you go. You have the forecasted points, you have the total salary, and then it goes by the position and which players to pick. Then you just copy and paste, not copy and paste, but you look at this and then you pick the exact players it tells you to on whichever site you're on. So it's very easy when it just tells you what to do, and it does it much faster than you could ever do it without a computer. So the computer basically does all the work for you. Once you've gotten this down, once you're getting the statistics in there, and once everything is working. Also, last but not least, you need to consider making alternatives of the original lineup. So let's say your original lineup is like this one. It's Pau Gasol, Rudy Gay, Marc Gasol, Tony Wroten, Klay Thompson, Jimmy Butler, Darren Collison, and Joe Johnson. Now, one of these players can get injured, and that could completely throw you off. Now, what are you going to do if that player gets injured? If a player gets injured, you're probably not going to rank in the top percentage of players, and you probably won't make any money. So what you can do is have alternative lineups. So instead of just creating all kinds of different variations of the spreadsheet where it does it all at one time, now you can do that, but you could just delete a few names from the template or X them out on roto grinders. Okay, just click the exclude button right here on the far right. And when you exclude them, you can come up with the best possible lineup without that player being possible. So then you can use that as a second lineup. So many of these events, like on FanDuel, for instance, they'll allow you to play either one lineup only, or you can enter multiple lineups in the same event, or you can enter different lineups in different events, however you want to do it. Just look at what the event allows you to do. So this one, for instance, says 1 entry per person, as you can see. So I couldn't do that with this one, but I might enter my alternative lineups in other events. Or get out of this one and get one that has more entries possible per person. So that allows you to minimize your risk more. In a way, if you really know what you're doing, I would recommend just using one lineup at a time your first few weeks or your first few months. And if you have a nice, consistent level of success, then you want to start diversifying more by having lineups that exclude each player. So you'll have a lineup that excludes, say, this is your best lineup. You have one that excludes this player. You'll have one that excludes this player. You'll have one that excludes this player. But see, when you do that, you run into another problem. Now you have, 9 different lineups or so. 9 or 10 different lineups. And all but one of them will have each one of those players. So then what you could do is you would delete, say, Pau Gasol. You would do one without Rudy Gay. Then you could do one without Gasol and do one without Marc Gasol. So then you would go down the list again. So you would do that twice. You do one without that top player in the list, and then you do it without him, without each of the others. And then you go down the list, and then you write down the lineup for each one. Okay, so for example, this is your best lineup. You enter this lineup. You enter your alternative without the first player. You enter your alternative without the second player, and you go down the list. Okay, so we all have that. That's easy to understand. Now you go down, and on the one without the first player, you also do it without the second player. So you do a lineup without the first two, you do one without the first and third, you do one without the first and fourth, you do one without the first and fifth, and then you go through the other one. Then you do one without the second and first, you do one without the second and third, you do one without the second and fourth, you do one without the second and fifth, you do one without the second and sixth players. So this way you get 9 or 10 lineups for each group, and you don't have to be completely reliant on one player 90% of the time to stay healthy in the given game or week that they're playing. So that's just kind of a side note. You don't need to worry about alternatives starting out just yet, but later on you're going to want to play maybe up to 40, 50, even 100 different lineups. That's what the professionals do, because they minimize the risk of, if one player underperforms, it doesn't kill all their lineups. So that's just another way that you can reduce your risk once you're pretty good. Obviously, you have to factor in entry fees as well, so keep that in mind. But if you feel like you learned something from this video, if you feel like you got some information on how to make money with daily fantasy sports, please like and subscribe so I can create more videos like this for you. If you think there's something in the 9 steps I covered that was left out of the process that you have to factor in when it comes to making money doing this, or if you just want to let me know what you thought about the video in general, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I'm always looking for feedback to improve these videos and make them better. If you want to get all the video notes, all the resources that I mentioned, all the links, and related content to this video, you can go to selfmadesuccess.com. I'll have a link to that page in the first couple sentences of the video description for you so that you can get the most out of this video. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you have a great day.